Welcome back to the channel and welcome to part 4 of my diagnosis journey. When we left off last time, I was just getting to the part where the doctor had taken me off the cardiac diet and we were moving towards a diagnosis. So there were some hours in between me having the MRI and the results coming in and the doctor entering the room to give me the news. When he walked in with the results, he said, "It looks like you have MS." He said, "I'm pretty sure you have MS, but we're going to have to do some additional tests to confirm. Um, what do you know about MS?" And I didn't really know anything about it simply because it wasn't an area of focus for me. Like, you have this general knowledge of different kinds of diseases, but you don't really have the particulars. You don't know what what it entails, what the symptoms are, what the actual disease process is. You don't know any of those things unless you have somebody in your life who has the disease, right? This is one of those diseases that it's not like breast cancer or colon cancer or some of the other things like that where you know what it is, you know what it entails, you know what it does, all of those things. MS is sort of the snowflake disease because no two people are alike, and it's often mistaken for other things. So somebody with Lyme disease might get an initial MS diagnosis before they figure out that that's not what it is. And then people in general will say things like, "Oh, muscular dystrophy." I'm like, "No, multiple sclerosis," so so I had just, the basic knowledge, the same knowledge that anybody in passing who has not studied it has. And basically, he told me that it was a progressive disease, that over time I would get worse and worse until, and he kind of just shrugged and left the until hanging. And I'm like, until what? Is that like until I can't walk anymore? Until I'm dead? Like, what does that until mean? And there's something to be said for the feeling that comes over you when you get a diagnosis in that format, in that way, right? They tell you you have this incurable disease that you don't really know that much about, and then you get this until and a shrug. And it's like, alrighty then, thank you so much. Appreciate that. So clearly, I had some studying to do, and obviously, I went down the whole rabbit hole of research after he left. But in the meantime, the moment those words came out his mouth, I had sort of this physiological response. I had, like, I held my breath for a second, trying to let it soak in and to process it, right? When you hear something that's startling like that, you need a moment to process. And then there's, my heart started to pound. It's like I could hear my heart beating in my ears because it was pounding so hard. And then it was like a struggle to breathe. Like, I couldn't take a deep enough breath to get enough oxygen inside my body for all of my functions to continue. And then, you know how when you put the seashell to your ear and it has that sort of sound? I had that without the seashell. That's what it was like for me. So I didn't want to, I don't know how long all of that, I don't know if that was like 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is, because I felt like I was frozen in a moment. But once that moment was over, I had family members there and friends there. And so I went back to that facade that we put on where everything is great regardless of what it is and we can deal with it. And it was time to get back to laughing and joking, which I did. And, you know, when you are hiding that part. It's still going to have to come out. It still has to be expressed. It still has to be processed. You still have to deal with it. You're just not dealing with it in that moment because you don't want your initial part of dealing with that to be in front of a bunch of other people. So I just continued the visit and I smiled and I laughed and, we all joked until everybody left. And then that night when everybody was gone, first I was still trying not to deal with it. So I had my Kindle with me and I watched some movies on Netflix. And when the battery got low enough that I needed to charge it, it was time for me to start dealing with some of it. And that's when the tears came. And I cried and I cried. And I was trying not to do the sobbing kind of cry because, it's early in the morning and there are other patients on the floor. They're in the rooms next to me. And I did not want to wake them up from hearing somebody losing it. So I just sobbed silently. I just like into the pillow sometimes, or just quietly as the tears just flowed down my face. And, I was stuck in that moment for however long I cried, whether that was 15 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, I don't know. But the next day, or it's actually later that day because, I'm crying after midnight. The next day, they came in and they told me that we were going to do a lumbar puncture. That's what we were doing to confirm that it was, in fact, MS. Okay. They told me that that an intern would be doing it because I didn't have health insurance. And I was like, wait a minute. Surely you didn't mean intern. You must have meant like, a resident or somebody who's been doing it for a little while who needs a little bit more experience, right? But they're a full-fledged doctor. And she said intern. And I was like, oh no, that's not what we're doing. And I said, isn't that usually done by an anesthesiologist or somebody like that? And she said, yes, but you don't have insurance. So he's not going to do it for you. I said, did you ask? She said, no, because I know that he's not going to do it if you don't have insurance. I said, could you ask? And she takes this, I've pushed past her last nerve sort of sigh. Fine. And I said, thank you. So she goes and asks, and shock of all shockers, he says yes. So I'm waiting for him to come, and I'm still trying to keep my spirits up. I'm in the room alone, and so I'm not losing my control at the moment. And he shows up and he looks around the room and he says, I thought I was doing a lumbar puncture. I said, I thought you were doing a lumbar puncture. He's like, nothing is set up. I said, I know that nothing is set up. And he said, you don't even have a hip lock. And I raised my arm and I said, I know, they didn't even set up the hip lock. And he calls in the nurse and he says, am I doing the lumbar puncture someplace else? And she said, no, you're doing it here. And he's like, well, where's the setup? She goes, oh, I'll go get it right now. And she comes back with a kit and he looks at it and he says, I can't use that on her. That's going to be painful for her. And she's going to have, side effects from that. He said, never mind, just forget it. So he calls his office and talks to his medical assistant and says, I'm over at the hospital. I'm getting ready to do a lumbar puncture. They don't have anything set up and they're trying to give me the wrong kit. So can you grab one? He gave him the specifics, which I don't remember, of what exactly he needed to bring over, and had him meet us in my room. He did the hip lock. He gave me the anesthesia, which was a sort of cocktail of fentanyl and morphine. and told me how he wanted me to position myself. He had his medical assistant sit in front of me, and I just had to hold on to his arms, and I'm sort of hunched over a table holding on to his arms. And he told me to just look at him. And I was thinking to myself, not a problem at all, because he was a good looking young man. He had beautiful eyes. And I was just like, I'll just look right into those and that will take care of it. And it was completely painless. The process was so smooth. This anesthesiologist knew exactly what he was doing. And he wasn't worried about whether or not I had health insurance. He was worried about whether or not he could take care of my health. That's the difference. And that is what helped me to have a much better experience. So they automatically put me on high dose steroids, IV steroids, because they made the assumption that even though I hadn't had the results of the LP yet, with the number of lesions that they could see on my brain, they were pretty sure that it was in fact MS. And I had to leave. I couldn't stay because my daughter was coming home. She was out on a color guard competition and she was going to be coming home. And I didn't want her to come home to an empty house trying to figure out where mom is, or to tell her over the phone while she's out of town that I'm in the hospital because I have this disease. I felt like that was something that I needed to do in person with her, sitting on the couch, holding her hand and giving her the news. So I checked myself out, AMA, which is against medical advice, and I went home. I had to get an eye patch that I would switch back and forth because with double vision, it was really difficult to get around, and I didn't want one eye to get stronger or weaker than the other. And it was challenging. There's much more to come on different symptoms and other things, but I tell you that that was my diagnosis journey. And even though it was in 4 parts, and even though so much happened, it was all within a 2 to 3 day period. So 48 to 72 hours, all of those things that I just described in these 4 episodes all took place in that very short period of time. It was just a lot because so much went wrong during this entire process. And I hope that no one else ever has to experience that. But I am grateful that they were able to get a very quick diagnosis, because a lot of times with multiple sclerosis, the diagnosis can take days, months, weeks, or even years. So that was my diagnosis journey. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Leave me questions down below. Give us a like and subscribe, and make sure you share this with anybody that you know who has MS or who suspects they have MS. And stay tuned for the Gen X perspective on so much. We'll talk to you soon.